Coming up next on Money in Your Pocket, Kathy Sweedler from the University of Illinois Extension will be here to talk about children and money. For some, money is not an easy subject to address, but Kathy has some great ideas on how to start the conversation from the time kids are just learning about money through the teen years and beyond. Good money habits early in life can reap benefits into adulthood when it comes time to buy a car or a home. So it's never too early to learn about the power and value of money. Stay with us. Money in Your Pocket starts right now.
This program is made possible in part by Credit Union One. Proud to support Money in Your Pocket. Credit Union One offers savings and lending options. Additional information on membership available at creditunion1.org. Loans subject to approval. Accounts are insured up to $250,000. By member's choice, this institution is not federally insured.
Hello, and thanks for joining us for Money in Your Pocket. I'm your host, Lori Casey, and today we're talking about teaching our children about money with Kathy Sweedler from the U of I Extension. Thanks for coming back.
Welcome to be here. I just enjoy it.
So I want to ask you, where do our thoughts or values about money come from?
Well, they really come from all around us, obviously the media and where we grow up and things like that. But a lot of it comes from, watching the people closest to us, like our family, and how they handle their money and what they talk to us about.
Mm-hmm. Money, we had you on a previous episode, we said money is a hard subject to talk about in certain families. So that's kind of how you have to get the conversation started. But how do you even talk to your kids about money if it's just something that you're not really comfortable with?
And people really struggle with this. Mm-hmm. And it's one of those things where I suggest start talking to your kids when they're really quite young. Maybe like they're 2 or 3 and you're at the grocery store and they say, "Can I have this?" And you can say to them, today we need our money to buy nutritious food. So we can't buy this toy today, even though you'd really like to have it, because we need these other things. And just, as it comes up, be able to respond to that. Or, if you're at the bank and you're getting cash out of the ATM, make sure they know that you put money in from your paycheck and there's not just this magic box that hands out money randomly to people.
As adults, sometimes we have a hard time distinguishing between wants and needs. You use the child at the grocery store. They want. How do you explain the difference between wants and needs to a child?
Well, I think that's really a challenge. But it really comes back to sharing your values, because we have the wants, the things that we need to survive, like, paying our rent and keeping utilities on and food. But then, if your children are like mine, they're very quick to pick up that you're also buying things that aren't like for survival, right? And that's where, you can say to them, well, in our family, we value doing this, and that's where we're going to put our money, and that's more important than doing something else. And it comes up when they'll say, well, my friend down the street has this. How come I don't have that? Well, it's a value statement.
So what are some ways that you can sort of start that conversation? Because it probably seems a little awkward to say, having a conversation, well, we value this in our family. So what are some ways to bring that up? Because that's important, sharing your values.
Right. And sometimes what I like to do, especially with little kids, is read stories with them. It's just so much fun anyway. And there's really wonderful books out there that talk about, the things that we do with money, whether it's saving money or spending money or sharing it with others. And so when you read these stories, which you can, go to your local librarian and ask for some ideas, then you have a chance to talk about it and relate it back to your own life and how this is what you would do or this is what you wouldn't do and why. And maybe even while you're watching TV, you might see examples of that too.
So when should you start talking to your kids about money? How young is too young?
Well, I don't know if any age is too young to talk about it, but the conversation will change as they get older. And you do want to keep it age appropriate. You remember that, especially when we're talking about saving goals or things like that, a week is a really long time for a young child. And even as kids get into middle school and things, several months or several weeks down is going to still be a long time. So when you're trying to help them think about not just today's wants, but thinking about those longer term goals, while long term for us might be 5, 10 years, 20 years, long term for them is going to be a matter of weeks. And so you want to keep that in perspective too.
We've got the old-fashioned piggy bank here on the set. Is that a helpful tool for kids?
I think it is, because it's very visual, right? And it doesn't have to be a fancy piggy bank. It could be a jar or a box. And to get started saving just small amounts really do add up over time. And I think there's kind of magic in discovering that.
And it makes a little sound.
It makes a little sound. I know one family that when their kids were really too young to even hardly talk, when they would come home, they would take the change out of their pockets and give it to their preschoolers and say, go put it in the jar, we're saving for your college education. I mean, that really communicates two values, right? We're gonna save for something that's important, and education is important to us. And so they were loading up that bank when they really didn't have the big picture yet, but it was part of their habit, their life.
So as kids start to get a little bit older, they maybe start getting money for birthdays and Christmases. How should parents handle that money for their kids?
That's a challenge, right? Because it comes in these lump sums and you want them to think about it wisely. And we have our ideas about what is wise, which doesn't always match what your 12-year-old's wise is. So I think it comes back to communication. As a parent, you can set guidelines. That's perfectly acceptable. But there's also something about learning from our mistakes. So sometimes we're in a situation where maybe they received gift money and you've talked about, wouldn't it be nice to spread this out over time? And they go buy one odd thing. Well, okay, there's natural consequences there, and they're going to learn from that. And maybe it's better they learn when they're 12 than when they're 30. So, it's kind of a juggling act, I think, as a parent, to try to figure out where those lines are.
Let's talk about allowances, because that can be a whole other set of issues. Should kids get an allowance?
Well,
I'm putting you on the spot here.
Okay, I really think that we need kids to have an opportunity to practice using money. And because they need to understand that when they spend it, it's gone, that sometimes you buy something and it breaks, sometimes we need to save it over time to get something bigger and better. But how families choose to distribute that money really depends on their own personal experiences, their values, and how much money they have available. So allowances may not work into some family structure. Money may not flow that regularly, may not have it. Other families feel very strongly that, we don't just hand out money, you have to earn it. Okay, so maybe tied to chores, might not be tied to chores, or it might be tied to everybody does a certain amount in our household, but there's extra things that you can do that you can earn more money if you're saving for a goal. So I think, again, you just have to really sit down and think, what's going to work in my family? How am I going to provide an opportunity for my kids to practice using money? And then once you do that, be consistent for a while so you can see how it works, and then you can modify it if you need to.
I think that's key of what you said, giving kids the opportunity to practice with money. Because as you said before, some families may not have money for an allowance. So what are some ways that parents can allow their kids to practice with money if there's not a lot to go around?
Well, I think you have to look for those opportunities. So, for example, maybe at the holiday time, you would like your youngster to be, purchasing gifts for their grandparents or siblings. You can give them a set amount of money. It doesn't have to be a large amount, and say, here's some money for holiday spending. Who do you want to buy gifts for? Okay, how do we divide that out? What's it going to cost about for each person? And then do you realize if you spend more on one person's gift, you'll have less on somebody else's? We're talking about the whole budgeting process right there in a really concrete amount of time. So we're not looking at, trying to spread this out, decision making out over a year. We're talking about in the next week when we go shopping, how do you want to do this? Sometimes summer vacations are an opportunity to do that. If you have a chance where maybe you're planning an event where you're going to go to a park and have a picnic. Well, we want to take dinner. What would we purchase? How much would that cost? And really just talking through the process, and maybe having a set amount and then saying, oh, well, if we buy that, are we going to be hungry? Because we're not going to have enough of something else, So you have to look at your own, again, look at what you're doing in your family and where are those logical places that you can give them a chance to practice.
Do we, as kids, learn about money from our parents and then translate that into adulthood?
Well, to some extent, yes.
Okay.
I think that we definitely, we're always learning from people around us, and I think parents need to be very aware that their children are watching them and thinking about how are they handling money and how are they communicating about it. So I think that's definitely true. But I also think that personality comes into play. So sometimes I'll ask people, well, do you and your siblings, your adult siblings, handle money the same way? And yet you had the same parents. So if you're not, what does that tell you? So it's not all on the parents.
Yeah, so if you grew up with a thrifty parent, you as an adult may go the opposite way.
You may go the opposite way, but I still think there's an opportunity for you to learn skills and habits that then as an adult you're going to choose whether you follow those or not.
So as our kids get older, they may get after school jobs. What advice do you have for parents on how to handle that now they've got this nice little income coming in?
I think at that point, a lot of families feel that they could start taking some responsibility for some other expenses. Some families have rules about X percentage needs to go away for saving for either college or that first car or, first and down payments on rent or something like that. And then, you may be able to, usually for some people, clothing is a real prime motivator at that age. And so it may be like, well, I will buy you this amount of clothing, but if you want those extra fancy jeans or another sweater, then you're going to have to pay for that. Others are, just again, it may be that you get tired of like, can I have money to go here for Thursday night or Friday night or Saturday or whatever? And you're like, okay, that your entertainment is now your business. So again, looking at how much they're making, what are those new expenses that are rising as they get older and have more things they want, and which ones can you pass over to their responsibility to manage those costs.
And it's interesting, I think, as teenagers start getting their own money, it's like, oh, that's harder to spend than when it was just coming from mom and dad. I want to keep my money.
There's been many a teenager that said, if I have to pay for that outfit, I don't really want it that much.
It was easier.
So yes, I think this is where we start looking at, how much is it worth to you? And it's a lot easier to evaluate when it's your own dollar.
That's true, and you've had to work for it. What about getting kids to save money for college and when they go away to college?
I think this is one of those prime examples where really habits make a difference. And so starting at a very young age to encourage your child to save money, I think is really important. And we're seeing some real kind of breaking research that shows that when youth have a savings account where they know that money is being saved for college or education after high school, that it's actually making a difference in whether or not they believe they can go and they apply and they do it. And the amounts don't have to be large amounts. It's that somebody believed enough to set up a savings account for me, encourage me or help me start saving money, and then, I've got this money, I can do this. So really formalizing it, whether it's a piggy bank and then moving on as they get older to a savings account, really does seem to make a difference.
How would you suggest parents deal with, their friend down the street gets anything they want, has the expensive gifts, and your child comes home and says, well, Tim got this, why can't I have that?
I think this is where we start talking, communication is so important, It's confusing for kids, especially younger kids. Why does somebody have a bigger house and somebody have a smaller house? Why do they get this fun toy and I don't? And there may be a variety of reasons. It may be that your values are that you don't put money towards whatever that toy or fancy boat or whatever is. It may be economics. You can't afford it. And I think, being honest about it, when they're old enough to ask the question, then being as honest as you can in the answer back is reasonable. You don't have, a lot of people are worried about giving out exactly how much they make. I don't know that you have to, but I think you can say, some people make more money than other people, and this plays out in how much money you have to spend.
Well, we had you on a previous episode, we were talking about family budgeting, and we had the envelope system. Is it a good idea to get your kids involved in the expenses of running the house and budgeting?
I think it really can be, because if you think about it, How do they know how much you pay on electricity? You might be saying all the time, turn off the lights, it costs too much money.
Yeah.
But they don't have any perspective. And they don't have any perspective of how much your income is, or how it, even if you tell them their income, and it sounds like this large amount, they're going to think you have all kinds of extra money. But when you see it kind of divided out into, shelter and utilities and food and insurance and other things, then they can really see, oh, at the end, there's really not that much wiggle room.
Or I didn't know you had to pay for the lights and the utilities or the cable TV.
I had one young man in a financial simulation say to me, what is utilities? So he explained it was like, electricity and gas and water. And he said, what do you mean water? I said, well, like when you turn on the water to get a drink of water at home out of the faucet, he goes, you pay for that? Nobody pays for water, it's just there. And we were like, no, you do pay for that.
So the kids might not be as aware of what things cost or what you actually have to pay for.
No, it just hadn't come up, right? He had never thought about it.
Kathy, when your teen comes home with maybe they get their first check or direct deposit from their job, is that a teachable moment to kind of go through what's all being taken out of your check?
Definitely, because I think it's usually a surprise because they've often taken their hourly salary and multiplied it by their hour, and they expect X amount of dollars, and they don't realize that there's all kinds of things that are going to come out of that paycheck before they get the final amount. So you can talk about that and explain what some of these different things are, like taxes and FICA and what all that is covering. And think about, what else do you want to take out of that? Do you want some of that to automatically go towards savings for a goal? Because sometimes you can set it up that way.
And you had talked about as kids get that money, a way of, as they start working and they want maybe this iPad, that you can actually equate, well, it costs this much. This is how many hours you have to work.
Exactly. So sometimes that helps them kind of put it in perspective. Is it worth working X number of hours to purchase this item? That's a little different than it used to be when it was a gift, or they just sort of, didn't have to think about it that way. And it puts that value for their their energy right there in front of them.
That's interesting. What else? You had talked earlier about finding age-appropriate things. How do you know when your child is ready to, do the piggy bank or other things?
I think we have to remember that they kind of move through, they're pretty concrete, and then they can start, as they get into teens, start thinking more abstractly. So when people are talking about goals, you want to make it for the younger kids, as concrete as possible, whether that's like a picture or a short-term goal. And then as they get older, you can extend that. But again, they'll ask you questions, and if you watch for the cues, you'll start seeing things. You want to make, when you set them a challenge, whether, like if they say they want to save for something, you want to make sure that it's realistic for them. They don't get frustrated completely. So you may have to talk about that, well, it costs this much and this is how much you earn or have each week. So how is this going to work? Do you want to wait a year for it, or do you have a different goal in mind?
Is this generation of kids a little more wants right now versus maybe when you and I were growing up? Are we seeing a change in kids' behavior of, maybe it's the media and television and friends, that instant gratification?
Well, I kind of think human behavior is such that we all like instant gratification. So, but I will say that, of course, when you see something advertised, it creates a want. That is the point of marketing.
Yeah.
And I think that, again, another great conversation piece is to talk about, what if you're watching TV together and you see an ad, you say, what do you think about this ad? Does that, do most people drive their cars, onto the top of a peak, and is that what we would need? Or, what's realistic here, and what are they creating a vision that's not really what fits in our needs? And the same thing with other things too. It's an opportunity for conversations.
Teenagers wanting a car also brings up several more questions about what it really takes to have a car.
What a great conversation starter, right? Because, usually what they're thinking about is how fun it's going to be to have that independence and be able to drive around. And then the reality starts to hit when you talk about not only the monthly payments for that car, but how are you going to handle insurance? How are you going to handle gasoline? What about maintenance costs? And, sitting down and kind of making a list of what all those possible costs were and what they could be and who's going to be responsible for them is a really good way to kind of look at an expense and expand it out so they can see that it's not quite so simple always as what we might first think.
Any thoughts on, teenagers usually don't get credit cards, but I know college students, that's one of the first things that they can see when they go to college. Oh, I can get a credit card. What are some tips that you have for parents on talking to your kids about credit?
Well, there's two pieces there. One, it's not so easy for college students to get credit cards as it used to be. There's a law now that requires that parents co-sign, or if they're under 21, they have to be able to prove they have the financial capacity to pay it back. So that's really changed things. And most campuses don't let different institutions come in and give away credit cards anymore on campus. So a lot of that's changed out. And again, from my perspective, and this is partially my values coming through here, is that I think that credit can be a financial tool, and that practicing with it can be helpful for a young adult when they are kind of still being, checking in with their parents. They can get that practice in. Other people feel very strongly that credit is, not something they want to deal with at all, and that gets them into trouble, and so they just back off of it, or they just don't think it's a good idea. So again, there's pros and cons to having a credit card, but I think it's also an opportunity for education. What happens if you don't make your payments on time? What happens if you don't pay off the whole balance? How will those interest charges pile up? Do you plan to bail them out or not?
Yes, because your name is probably on that credit card or that student loan.
So some parents have chosen to get what's called a secured credit card or help their youth get a secured credit card. Then your name doesn't have to be tied to theirs, but it involves putting some money down that backs that card as collateral in an account that should earn interest. And then you can get a credit card that kind of, let's say you put in $500, you'd have a credit card with maybe a $500 limit.
That sounds like
so it's a good practice method.
Yeah, and finally, kids probably need to know, as you said, the long-term effects of your money decisions when you become an adult. We've talked about that several times on this show, how these decisions and choices you make maybe when you're in college can affect you when you want to go get your first home.
This is the huge challenge, right? Is as youth transition into young adults, is for them to understand that their actions are really impacting their life going forward. And yes, their parents are there to give them guidance, but they're the ones making these choices and decisions. So, if you have practiced some of these things when they're younger and the consequences are smaller, then I think that can be helpful for when we kind of merge into that real world where we can be taking out loans that have really long consequences to them. So again, trying to guide them, but there's lots of places people can borrow money and things happen. So keeping that communication going, but and talking about kind of worst case scenario, best case scenario, and where do you want to fall in between.
Kathy, we have just a few minutes left. Any last little tidbits of advice you have for our parents watching about getting their kids learn about money and be responsible?
I think, start with those little conversations and those little opportunities that come up to generate conversation. Give your chance for your youth to practice, even if it hurts to watch them make some mistakes along the way. And then, just try to keep those communications open. We see a lot of large decision making between the time young adults are, 18 to 25, and you don't want to just step out of that whole process if you can at that time, but have your experience help them along the way.
All right, well, Kathy, thank you so much for coming by Money in Your Pocket. We appreciate you being on this show and a previous one.
Thank you.
Thanks. When it comes to teaching your children about money, Kathy says you should share your values with your children and start while they are young. Look for age-appropriate ways to practice money with books, a piggy bank, or even involving your children in the household budget process. As children get older, Kathy says to continue the money conversation because the issues become more complex, such as car buying, saving for college, and student loans. So that's the bottom line for this show. We hope this information helps you put more money in your pocket.
This program is made possible in part by Credit Union One. Proud to support Money in Your Pocket. Credit Union One offers savings and lending options. Additional information on membership available at creditunion1.org. Loans subject to approval. Accounts are insured up to $250,000. By member's choice, this institution is not federally insured.